Hello, American Lit. This is the lesson for Monday, April 7. Today we're talking about realism and naturalism, and we're applying those concepts to Jack London's short story, To Build a Fire. To get us started, I'm just going to talk briefly about those terms, realism and naturalism, so you have some sense of what to look for. And to do that, we're going to go to page 347 of your online textbook. That's what I'm on right now. And again, you can do that by going up to the top of your online textbook and typing in 347. So we're going to be discussing this first paragraph, and if you need more detail, and I would strongly recommend that you read below in this chart for a breakdown even further with more detail of each of those styles. Jack London's To Build a Fire can be classified as a work of both realism and naturalism. Realism is a style of writing in which the author attempts to show life as it really is. It maintains an objective, detached view of characters and events, allowing readers to draw their own conclusions. So, really key here, showing life as it really is. So what we're going to see there, we're going to see a lot of vivid description, a lot of vivid detail. We're going to see, characters that are fully developed and often focus on just one character. And we're going to see an objective tone here. The narrator is not going to inject a lot of personal feelings or opinions about the matter. They're just going to relate what is happening so that the reader can sort of look at that and say, okay, what do I think about this? And that's really to the point. Detached here means just that they're not injecting a lot of opinions into it. They're just trying to give you the straight view of what is happening. Naturalism is similar to realism. Let's read about that. It uses many of the same techniques as realism, but views human life through the lens of scientific ideas such as Darwin's theory of natural selection. All right, and just to give you some background here, this refers to Charles Darwin. This was sort of a naturalist scientist, and in I believe the late 19th century, late 1800s, he published The Origin of the Species, which detailed his idea, his theory of evolution, basically, where species are challenged by their environments, and he was studying birds, but this would apply to all living species, where they encounter challenges in their environment which cause only the strong to survive, and the stronger of those species are the ones that are able to reproduce the best. And so over time, what you end up having is those with the weaker traits end up sort of dying out, whereas those with stronger traits, and that happens through sort of genetic mutation, end up being the ones that survive. And this idea, through naturalism is applied to humans as well. Humans encounter, obstacles in nature that cause the stronger ones to survive and the weaker ones to die out. So there's this naturalism can be seen as sort of the darker or the harsher side of realism, though they do share in that we do get this vivid, lifelike description of what is happening. There is more of a darker tone to it all, that ultimately man is going up against a huge force in the form of nature that will ultimately test him and is very often a matter of life and death. So for this to be broken down further, I encourage you to look at this chart that gives you more this in greater detail. But for our modeling today, I'm going to jump right into page 331, which is the start of our story today. And we're going to start with some background to the author, Jack London. So he's born 1876, died, sort of middle of World War I, 1916. Not only wrote adventure stories, he lived them. He traveled as a hobo across the United States, tried his luck in the Klondike Gold Rush, so that's sort of the far northwest part of the North American continent. Escaped a typhoon on a seal hunting ship and sailed the South Seas in his own boat, the Snark. London's formal education was limited, but he read widely using public libraries. Many of his works, including The Story to Build a Fire, have themes involving survival and humans versus nature, so the naturalist themes there. His novel The Call of the Wild brought London fame and is still one of his best-known works, and he died pretty young at the age of 40. So he's drawing on a lot of his own life experience, and we can see that in a lot of the details. We can see that the author is very well versed in the environment and the type of characters that he writes about. So let's jump into this. As we do so, we're going to sort of preview what we read with the reading guide down here, which you guys have an attachment on your Google Classroom. So to start, we're going to start with lines 1 through 10, and we're first looking for words and phrases that establish the story's setting. So let's just read through this first. Day had broken cold and gray, exceedingly cold and gray, when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail and climbed the high earth bank, where a dim and little-traveled trail led eastward through the fat spruce timberland. It was a steep bank, and he paused for breath at the top, excusing the act to himself by looking at his watch. All right, and actually, we have some details right away here, right? Exceedingly cold and gray. This is a vivid description, giving us, this is imagery, letting us feel the temperature, see what he's seeing, the protagonist in line 1 there. Fat spruce timberland, we get more details that sort of visible imagery, right? That tells us what this place looks like. And then the steep bank. So we're getting a clear image of the topography, the layout of the land. And so those are some details that we have there as well. Our next question is, how do these details contribute to realism? Well, they contribute to the realism by giving me, the reader, a very clear idea of what this place is like that the protagonist is traveling through. So that is the idea, right? We want to put ourselves in the shoes of the protagonist to get a sense of what he is actually experiencing. All right, so that should do it for our first couple reading guide questions. And then here, and you can see it's part of the answer here, what does the reader learn about the main character? And this is a little bit further down, lines 30 through 36, but we will continue reading, and then we'll pause to discuss that once we get there. So it was 9 o'clock. There was no sun or hint of sun, though there was not a cloud in the sky. It was a clear day, and yet there seemed to be an intangible pall over the face of things, a subtle gloom that made the day dark, and that was due to the absence of sun. This fact did not worry the man. He was used to the lack of sun. It had been days since he had seen the sun, and he knew that a few more days must pass before the cheerful orb, due south, would just peep over the skyline and dip immediately from view. The man flung a look back along the way he had come. The Yukon lay a mile wide and hidden under 3 feet of ice. On top of this ice were as many feet of snow. It was all pure white, rolling in gentle undulations, that's waves as undulations, where the ice jams of the freeze-up had formed. North and south, as far as his eye could see, it was unbroken white, save for a dark hairline that curved and twisted from around the spruce-covered island to the south, and that curved and twisted away into the north, where it disappeared behind another spruce-covered island. This dark hairline was the trail, the main trail, that led south 500 miles to the Chilkoot Pass, Daya, and Saltwater, and that led north 70 miles to Dawson, and still on to the north 1,000 miles to Nulato, and finally to St. Michael on the Bering Sea, 1,000 miles and a half, 1,000 more. And just to pause briefly, we don't have this in the reading guide, but this is a naturalist. I would say that this definitely contributes to the naturalism. Yes, there's vivid imagery here. You get a very clear idea of just the massive white expanse and the very cold expanse that he's finding himself, that the protagonist finds himself in. But also, you have this description of the natural environment sort of placed in contrast with this dark hairline, this very small piece of that environment, which is man-made, right? And that contrast, the idea that the man-made piece of it is so small compared to just the massive distances here. You know, we see these descriptions of 500 miles and 1,000 miles and half 1,000 more. The massiveness of what what comprises nature out here versus the small, relatively insignificant footprint that man has on this space, definitely sets up this contrast of, nature as being this massive force to be reckoned with, and the relatively small impact that man can have on this. So that's definitely a naturalist feature that we want to pay attention to. But let's read on. But all this, the mysterious far-reaching hairline trail, the absence of sun from the sky, the tremendous cold, more naturalist details there, it's a harsh environment, and the strangeness and weirdness of it all made no impression on the man. It was not because he was long used to it. He was a newcomer in the land, a Chichaco, and this was his first winter. The trouble with him was that he was without imagination. He was quick and alert in the things of life, but only in the things and not in the significances. 50 degrees below zero meant 80-odd degrees of frost. Such fact impressed him as being cold and uncomfortable, and that was all. All right, and here, this is where we can start to answer the question for 2. What do we learn about the main character? Well, we're learning about some of his flaws, right? He's without imagination, that's from line 32, and that he's unable to understand consequences or realities that lie beneath what is immediately apparent. So he's not able to maybe think, deeply into what the context, what the details of his surroundings might mean for him. We also learn that he's a newcomer, so this can be a liability too, right? Like someone who's native, who's used to that environment, who knows how to survive there, would have a better footing on how to survive. But he's a newcomer. And in a lot of ways, this sort of foreshadows a danger for him, right? If he's not able to think about consequences of things such as, the fact that it is very, very cold, 50 degrees below zero, if he can only think that that's cold and uncomfortable and not the sort of so how might that affect my body? How am I going to survive in that? What do I have to do to survive in that situation? Is a hazard, right? You need to sort of have a plan for what might happen to you if you're in that environment, but also that he's a newcomer. And so this idea that he's taking on this big risk really just by being out there, and the fact that maybe he doesn't understand what that danger is, and that's definitely going to be something that is going to play a big role later on in the story. So this is enough to get you guys started. Questions 1, 2, you do have the rest of the reading guide to complete, and that will be a tremendous resource, especially once you finish the story at the end of next class, because there will be a quiz that calls on you to contribute a lot of that information and that analysis that you were able to gather thus far. To that, there will be a reading guide for the second part of the story as well. But for today, I just want you to give me some details that contribute to the realism, and give me some that contribute to the naturalist features of the text as well. And I refer you to page 347 to help you hone in on what would make it realist, what would make a certain detail naturalist. Please do remember to, as I was doing, cite to line numbers. And your reading guides can actually be a tremendous resource for this as well. So that is it for today. Thanks for watching, and look forward to seeing those responses.